Let's talk about the power of secondary Encumber. When combined with Galvanized Shot for gun condition overload, it's one of the most game-breaking combos in Warframe. This one arcane changed my randomizer list forever, but it's notoriously one of the worst farms in the game. At max rank, secondary Encumber has a 24% chance on any status effect proc to give another random status effect based on the damage of the initial effect. When combined with Galvanized Shot at max stacks, you can get up to a 1920% direct damage buff if you can apply every status in the game. But there's some very important things to keep in mind. This arcane has a pseudo-internal cooldown that prevents multiple bonus status effects on the same bullet, triggering only once per instant. So even if you have 3 times multi-shot and over 100% status, once one of those status procs has triggered Encumber, it won't trigger on any of the other status effects from that bullet. But what multi-shot and status will give you is just more chances to trigger Encumber that first time for each bullet. The same is also true for hitting multiple enemies. Even if you proc status on 6 enemies with 1 bullet of a shotgun, it will only trigger 1 instance of Encumber on 1 enemy you hit. But even with a small amount of delay between hits, you can actually proc multiple instances of Encumber from a single bullet, although those delays are purely weapon dependent, like Compressa or the Catch Moon. Now that the strange disclaimers are out of the way, it's important to note that this arcane is super powerful, but only really works on weapons we would call bullet hoses. And so there are 4 obvious factors to decide whether a weapon is enough of a bullet hose to qualify. Status chance, fire rate, reload speed, and mag size should be pretty obvious, but there's also multi-shot, although that one's just a little different. The power of this arcane is definitely on a spectrum, with some major outliers on the powerful side. Here's Kuva Nukor, which is a beam weapon, so the tick rate on those weapons almost guarantees you'll be proccing just about every status effect in the game. But because it's a chain beam, it has a level of crowd clearing potential that leads me to this pretty standard build. I've replaced Hornet Strike with Galvanized Shot to actually create the combo, while still maintaining Viral and Primed Heated Charge. The Riven is absolutely not necessary, as it just gets replaced with Frostbite without really losing much power. But also remember that this weapon has over 100% status, and multi-shot doesn't mean more status on beam weapons, so you actually have a lot of wiggle room to try out different combos while still maintaining power. Some people will probably say Viral Fire is a waste, and those mods should be devoted to things like Galvanized Crosshairs. But from my own experience, if I'm going to be proccing a lot of status, Viral is an instant health damage buff, while Fire not only reduces armor, but also offers a damage over time element that scales off of the Galvanized Shot bonus. Now compare that to Tenet Diplos, which is just a full auto with much lower status, but there's actually not a crazy difference in the total number of status effects on the target. That long reload speed will basically cap the level of power you can achieve. This weapon is also just way different in general because it's just a basic full auto, so I've added blast damage to give it that crowd clearing power I expect from all the weapons in the randomizer. The nice thing is that I still get to keep Hornet Strike, plus the combo with Galvanized Shot does actually buff the damage of the 5 meter AoE when maxing out blast procs or killing enemies. So that was a few examples of weapons that are actually good enough to use in the randomizer. Weapons that have built-in crowd clearing power get access to both Viral and Fire, which is a pretty handy DPS boost, while weapons that would otherwise lack that power get blast damage for more broad usability. The judgments I've made on whether a full auto is strong enough to add blast damage and join the randomizer is pretty subjective, as the weapon needs to have a strict level of base power to compete with some of the stronger pistols. But all my Deviri lovers who get awful pistol rolls can rejoice, because of course, secondary Encumber will definitely buff basically every full auto pistol in the game, even if they aren't strong enough to benefit from blast nuking. It works beautifully, but there's one important trade-off. I have a minimum crit chance cutoff of about 28% base crit chance to hit 84% chance after critical delay. So any full auto below that cutoff will have 0 crit mods, and that definitely makes the build way simpler. A weapon like the Aximati Prime is a great example. It does have pretty high crit multiplier, but at 24% crit chance, it wasn't really worth leaning into. But the more important thing to understand is that not having crit mods just makes it so much easier on my brain, which is why I added the cutoff in the first place, just so I have a clear metric for when I can save myself some headache. The build you're seeing is still mostly single target, but thankfully, especially in Deviri, which is basically the only place I'll use it, you can be confident that it doesn't take much more than a couple seconds to kill anything. Now I wanted to compare that to Akbolto Prime, which does have well over 28% crit chance, so it's got a very strange build. With a mag size of 40 and only a 1.8 second reload speed, this weapon basically functions as a full auto. But here you can see how the build definitely changes because of those crit mods. If you're stingy with mod slots like I am, all I've done is removed the viral damage, so I just have Scorch and Primed Heated Charge. I was actually blown away at how powerful it was without that buff to health damage, but the damage boost you get from the crit stats really makes those fire procs nice and juicy, so you're not actually losing that much DPS without viral. Now, just like with melee influence, there's basically only one alternate route I use in terms of arcanes on pistols. Anything that isn't a bullet hose, but is still strong enough to compete in the randomizer, usually just has secondary Merciless or Deadhead. Although I'm kind of known for being the caveman who fails to consistently get headshot kills, so I only use Merciless. And while it doesn't benefit me at all on Incarnons, the small reload speed buff from Merciless does improve your uptime just a little bit. The Atomos Incarnon is a fun example of this, but it's also in a very unique category as a Merciless weapon. Because obviously the base form is one of the strongest chain beams in the game, especially with the Incarnon buffs. But the Incarnon form is a giant explosion that also deals really good damage. So I made the sacrifice and made it a Merciless weapon that doesn't have the Galvanized shot combo, mainly because that combo would almost be useless on the Incarnon explosion. Thankfully, the nice thing is that Merciless will still buff the beam, although drastically less than Encumber. But besides that, most of the other Merciless weapons are pretty easy to understand. I wanted to show off Tenet Spear-X because it's one of my favorite rail slug pistols that does pretty well with the little bonus reload speed from Merciless. This weapon and the Sepulchrum are pretty interesting because you're still able to dump bullets pretty easily. And even though the weapons are drastically different than bullet hoses, there's still some familiar vibes happening thanks to its ease of use. But a weapon like the Onos is a little more like what we would expect from a Merciless weapon. Using the Incarnon is so satisfying and does feel like more of a clear-cut example of one-shot guns that just want as much upfront damage as humanly possible. It follows weapons like Tenet Plinks and Gammacore Incarnon that incentivize you to not always be dumping ammo, but actually trying to maximize the number of enemies hit per shot. That's always been a real benefit for me with primary and secondary weapons. The fact that each weapon is so unique, but also so intuitive to understand. It means that if you try the weapon and the playstyle it wants isn't what you're looking for, there's still dozens of other options. Even with a category like secondary weapons, where the ratio of weapons I like using in the randomizer is only about 30 to 40% of the total weapons available, that still gives you choices that span the whole spectrum of playstyles and abilities. Thanks for watching. If you're new to Warframe or you enjoy these breakdowns, I'm live Monday through Thursday from 7 to 9 p.m. Pacific time, so feel free to ask any questions you want live.